I mentioned like people needing that kind of courage to feel these feelings, and but also needing that safety. And I want to talk a little bit about that sense of safety, like what can facilitate this in people. Um, because I feel like I've learned a lot about that experientially from this retreats, and I want to say it like confirmed a few theories that I had, where I don't know if you've read Impro by Keith Johnson. It's a okay.
Mm.
I'll explain it for the viewers anyway. So um, there's this guy Keith Johnson, and he has written a book about improv theater, improvised comedy theater. It is incredible for a whole bunch of reasons. I very highly recommend it. Like someone reviewed it and wrote it like it's superficially a book about improv theater, but it's actually a book about life.
Mm.
Which not a lot of books can actually say.
Yeah.
So the thing you need to know about this guy is that he hates school, and he hates school because it grades children for things that they shouldn't be graded. I mean, I read a book 5 years
Yeah.
ago. This is my paraphrasing. But like his example of this is something like, you've got these kids that are like, they're drawing art, they're having fun, they're being creative. And then suddenly they're in art class and they make a
Mm-hmm.
drawing and they're graded for it, which
Mm-hmm.
is just like, like you're gonna degrade a
Yeah.
child's drawing on,
Right.
like, what does that say? Like, oh, you're a better person than this other kid who draws a little differently. Like, it's a drawing.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, he really has this kind of framing of like by putting this sort of evaluation on people, or by putting this evaluation on people,
Mm-hmm.
or more precisely by saying that people are responsible for what they produce
Mm-hmm.
with art, but also with like their behavior, let's say, by saying that they're always directly responsible for it, you really constrain,
Mm-hmm.
I want to say, their freedom, but I don't mean their freedom in terms of like their freedom to act. I mean it in terms of something like we all have our self-directed self, so to speak, and we
Mm-hmm.
have like it's sort of like an intuitive, animalistic, like direct self. Oh, excuse me, I'm getting calls. 1 second.
Oh, okay.
That is, I am on mute now. Apologies.
No problem.
Um, fuck, where was I?
Um,
Oh yeah, like the
so
animalistic freedom stuff that
yeah.
we have. Um, yeah, we all have this sort of like animalistic um self where which is not self-directed, so we shouldn't be made responsible for kind of what it does in a bunch of ways. Obviously up to a certain point, but until that point, for sure.
Mhm.
And in improv theater, what he notices is that often when his students come in, they have all these thoughts around like things that they're not allowed to say. So like you're on the stage, you give them like a prompt, and the first thing that comes into their head is like something maybe violent or sexual or
Mhm.
like uncool or not even funny or something. And
Yeah.
they're on stage, so they have to be funny, because like
Right.
no matter how much people say, "Oh, it's all right, you can be unfunny," there are still gonna be funny people and less funny people, and it's
Yeah.
not like you're not gonna be,
Mhm.
evaluated in that capacity.
Yeah.
Um, which really stops people in their tracks because the moment that you rejected the first three suggestions of your mind, like your
Yeah.
mind gets the hint, it's not gonna give you much more. And then you're on stage, you have to improvise, it's all up to you, and you just can't do anything. Like nothing comes out.
Yeah.
Which is of course the big thing that you want to avoid in improv theater. So
Mhm.
he really went kind of in the other direction where he was really like being very clear that people are not responsible for what they say during these improvised sessions.
Mhm.
This isn't you who's saying these things. This is just some force in you that is expressing that you're just letting out. You're just facilitating its
Yeah.
exit out into the world.
Mhm.
And that's really valuable, and that really makes students come alive, and that really allows them to improvise in a
Mhm.
way that they've always blocked themselves from doing, you know?
Yeah.
Like normally there's always this sort of like thing where an action gets generated by this part, like a word or a behavior or some
Mhm.
physical action. And then it
Yeah.
passes through their own layer of like, is this allowed? Is this okay? Can I let this out into the world? And for some people, this layer is extremely strong, and then very little gets out into the world.
Right.
And you know, the goal is, of course, to kind of at least have certain spaces where you can remove that layer in people and just let
Mhm.
them express whatever.
Yeah.
Um, so his main way of doing that is just to really make people not responsible for the things that they say and to
Mhm.
let them make all the mistakes that they want to make there.
Mhm.
Um, and he goes even further. He goes into like mask work where people legitimately, you know, if you look into the mirror, you're no
Mm.
longer yourself. You
Mm.
are whatever thing this mask is representing.
Yeah.
So whatever comes out, like you don't have to relate that to yourself. You just have to
Mhm.
relate it to the mask. And that's a
Mm.
completely different type of
Sure.
freedom where some of his students had like incredibly intense experiences that they got so strongly into the power of that mask, so to speak, that it was
Mhm.
almost like a supernatural experience
Yeah.
where they would kind of almost like black out for the duration of it because they'd
Mhm.
lost their self so much and we're just channeling that spirit, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which is not like this isn't a supernatural phenomenon, it's just a very human thing. It is
Sure.
like when you give people the allowance to express something
Mhm.
and you tell them this isn't yours, just
Yeah.
express it. Like
Yeah.
beautiful things can happen.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that kind of a similar thing is true for these emotional spaces. Like so many people have this sense of like, oh, I can't have this emotion because that would make me a bad person, or I can't be
Mhm.
angry, or I can't feel this sort of way.
Mhm.
Um, and one kind of big thing is something like I'm kind of feeling like I'm coming to a sense of like emotional health in people is not being calm and zen the whole time. Although that's
Mhm.
definitely nice sometimes, you know. But
Mhm.
it's sort of like being able to let yourself feel every emotion very, very fully. And
Right.
this doesn't have to be necessarily your emotion. Like you can also just kind of act it out, for instance, or like
Mhm.
let it be direction to what someone else is feeling. Let it be your empathy of someone else's emotion. But just like let it into your body. Like if you like even the emotions like anger, grief, crying, also things like killer energy, slut energy, you know,
Mhm.
like sort of things like shadows that people have. I did
Yeah.
like a shadow workshop with the same facilitator, and they were like
Mhm.
preacher energy, Donald Trump energy, you know,
Okay.
preacher being the one who knows it all, who knows better than
Mhm.
everyone, and Donald
Yeah.
Trump being the one who just like takes everything, you know, he just doesn't care about you. Like these sorts of things. Like it's good to be
Mhm.
capable of those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And I feel like so often we kind of frame our identity in terms of the emotions that we let ourselves feel and express. And we say like, oh, I am not an angry person, you
Mhm.
know? And it's
Right.
just let's stop framing people in terms of their emotions in this sense,
Mm.
because we all have anger, we all have sadness,
Yeah.
we all have violence, we all have horniness, you know, we all have
Yeah.
everything, any
Yeah.
of these. And the beautiful things of these spaces that you see everyone and yourself in just about every energy you can imagine.
Mhm.
And then 20 minutes later, you have lunch with them and you're like, oh, we can just talk like normal people. Like, this is also completely normal,
Mhm.
um, which is just very beautiful to kind of be given that spaciousness
Mhm.
to just express everything. And I think that if you give people enough of that spaciousness of like, yeah, you can just sort of like a sense of like, yeah, we all feel these things anyway. So you're feeling this isn't necessarily a reflection of who you are as a person. Like it's just like
Mhm.
something that's in you right now. And for all you and I know, the moment you do express it, like 20 minutes later, you'll be transformed and it's no longer going to be there. So like there goes your whole theory of identity around this thing that you were feeling.
Right.
Like suddenly you might not be feeling it anymore. What now? You know, like better separate those things to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And that for me was also kind of like a big thing for me where I felt quite closed off during the first 2 days of this retreat.
Mhm.
But then I had that session with the belly to belly where I started sobbing. And from the moment that that sensitivity in me was kind of seen and accepted,
Mhm.
um, I felt very opened up. And then the next day there was like a fire, and then I felt like, oh, I can get to be in my joyful fire energy, and that's
Mhm.
fucking fantastic, you know. And from then on, I felt so great the whole time, like better than I've ever felt. Just like
Mhm.
very confident, very at ease, very curious about people, very, capable of great playfulness and capable of great emotion.
Mhm.
And all very fluidly, like one moment I'd be crying and then the next I'd be like really happy or something. And that's not like a craziness or whatever. It's just like whatever was alive in a space, I could
Mm.
really feel into that very strongly. And
Yeah.
that to me felt exactly right versus trying to keep that sort of muted and more on an average spectrum.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because, yeah, with these intense things, that sort of emotional fluidity and being able to really let it alive in your body and flow through your body,
Mhm.
that feels like kind of one of the main takeaways from me.
Yeah. What is it like when you're in a group where kind of like the point is to feel that connection and feel that intimacy, and you're not feeling it for like those first 2 days? Like what kind of goes on for you internally?
It is tough. Um, I can't quite tell you what it's like for other people, but I've experienced it a few times myself. And I think that what I'm about to say is also consistent with other people's impressions and anecdotes, which is something like um, these spaces are kind of a high charge in general. Like you spend a lot of time in close contact with a lot of people.
Mhm.
Um, normally you can kind of flee from that kind of conflict or that kind of close contact, but in this case, you kind of can't.
Yeah.
You're going to be confronted with a lot of your own patterns and a lot of your own stories. So like if you're around people, you might be like, oh, like no one here likes me actually.
Hmm.
Um, and like maybe you have that belief normally, like implicitly, and you kind of ignore it. But then in this space, it can come up, and you're like, oh, I see now that that's sort of how it is. Or you can have this sort of like, oh, people are actually not interesting. Like like I guess that's true. Um, you can have those things that sort of like these stories become more and more alive within you. And um, this is difficult, and it doesn't naturally resolve itself, I would say. It's not like I wish I could say something like, oh, at some point this reaches a breaking point, and you either like let it out in some way or you bring it up in some way, or it transforms itself or shows itself to be wrong, or whatever. Sometimes people, well, I mean, sometimes there's like a serendipitous element where an exercise hits you just right, like an interaction that you have with someone is precisely the thing that you needed.
Hmm.
And I would say that that tends to happen in these spaces. Like you go through so many different types of modalities and so many different types of interactions with people. If it is possible for an interaction to heal this in you,
Hmm.
you'll probably come across it. Or if you don't come across it, at some point maybe this tension in you will be so high that if you have that courage and you can bring it up into the space itself, and then
Hmm.
people will try and feel into you and feel into like what could that be that they are feeling, what could it be that they need,
Hmm.
and then they might give it to you without you even having to ask for it necessarily. Like even if you're there on the mat, like I don't know what I need,
Hmm.
other people can can feel into it and say, oh, I think you need this, and then they can give it to you. And more often than not, they might be correct.
I'm part of the reason that I ask is because it occurs to me that like vibe camp is it's not like organized as a healing thing, but for a lot of people they are not normally in groups, and here they are suddenly with a bunch of people, and there is a lot of opportunity for intimacy. And I think some people just like hit the ground running and they're friends with everyone and it's great, and some people it maybe takes a day or two to like kind of open up, and some people they just never do. And I'm wondering if from your experience in these spaces and like kind of being able to come into something where you're not feeling connected and then gain that connection, if there's like a clue, like some kind of state of mind or like an openness or something that people can try to cultivate in themselves that would help them kind of get from that disconnected space to like a connected space. If you have any insight on that.
Nothing that I would necessarily stand behind as like, oh, this is true, because it's an ongoing thing, a pattern in me. Like it always takes me like 1 to 3 days in these sort of group events and spaces to kind of really enter into it. Not always, sometimes. I think that one thing that helps is at least like getting into your body. Like you might not feel safe necessarily socially, but you feel safe physically, and that's already a lot. Like there is often this sense of like, even if it's so socially safe, if someone feels physically in their body that they are unsafe, then until they deal with that in a physical sense, it might not resolve. And it might resolve, for instance, like if they are open to hugs or cuddles, and then someone is able to give that to them, or like touch or something, then that might land in their body. But sometimes that just doesn't feel safe for that person, and then in that case I would say like I just advise like somatic work, make it physical, sound, breath, movement. What else? Make people feel safe. I think in general there's some sort of theme of getting to exist, and what that means is getting to exist physically, getting to take up space, getting to exist with your voice, right? But I also mean it in terms of getting to exist with your opinions, your views on things. This is what the judgment exercise is so powerful for, because it says like normally you're never allowed to judge strangers, right? You can't just point at someone and say, oh, you're this kind of person. I know it already. We haven't even talked, but I know. But it's not like we stop thinking those things. We just repress it. And that tells us essentially like, yo, you're not allowed to be here in this space with those prejudices, with those opinions. And I think that creating this sort of safety for these opinions to be expressed does an enormous amount towards letting people feel like they get to be there, because their opinions get to be there, their views on the world and people get to be there, rather than this gaslighty sense of like, no, like you don't get to view the world the way you do. You don't get to make your own conclusions about what your world is like. Which in general feels very wrong, at least to me. I figure to a lot of other people. But it can also take the thing of like topics that you're interested in, like, for instance, I imagine I haven't been to Vibe Camp, but I imagine that like a lot of it is like a shared sense of like knowing that we can all talk about the things that we're interested in, and it will be received well. And that's also a sense of, oh, you get to exist, in a way
Mhm.
that you might not normally get to.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to go to my office and talk about sexuality workshops because that's not allowed there, which
Mhm.
sucks, and it makes me feel less welcome there.
Right.
And no matter how nice people are going to be at my office, I'm always going to feel that a little bit of that sense of like, I don't get to be here.
Mhm. Yeah.
This
Yeah. If
this is
like
where I get to.
these parts of you are not welcome at the office and you have to like leave them at home or whatever, it does feel like you can't show up fully and so you can't be accepted fully.
Yes, yeah. And there's a bunch of modalities also in like the vibe cam sphere, like circling, right? Which is all
Mhm.
about like letting people have their own opinions.
Mhm.
Um, Circling, I'm still of a mixed mind on
Mm.
because I feel like it gets that authenticity thing really right, but
Mm.
then it doesn't really involve the healing aspect much at all.
Mm.
So it's one of the riskiest or dangerous practices that I know, even though it really maxes on authenticity. Versus something like the judgment game that we played here, where like you have a judgment about someone, well, you say it to their face
Mhm.
and you own it, and
Yeah.
then you play it out. You try to tap each other's ass, like this is really
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so things like that, I would say, yeah.
Mm.
And of course, like when it comes to safety, like I know that sexuality retreats, a lot of that I've been in, they always open with, or any kind of context where you're going to be touching people. Like a lot of spaces tend to open with like a consent workshop.
Mm.
Um, for instance, like the distance thing where one person stands and the other and can beckon or
Mm.
beckon away the other person to move closer at a
Yeah.
further distance. See how that feels in your body.
Mhm.
There's like a traffic light game where people can touch you and you say like green, this is fine. Orange,
Mhm.
this is a little spicy. Red, like get your hands off me.
Mhm.
All of this kind of stuff. There's a fun game where half the people are like flowers that are open with their
Mhm.
arms open, and the
Mhm.
other half, and they're blindfolded, and
Mhm.
the other half are like bees, sort of like buzzing around, touching people. And
Mhm.
then, like as a flower, if you're being touched in a way you don't like, you just close up, and then
Oh.
the bees go away to another flower.
Oh. Cool.
Like this sort of thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it's really great.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think at an event like this, like if I want to make people feel safe, I would take those
Mhm.
sorts of modalities and interactions.
Yeah.
And that includes letting people also say, hey, I don't feel safe, or I don't
Mhm.
feel belonging, or like, oh, I see that intense stuff has been happening for people, but I'm not resonating with it. I'm not empathizing with it.
Mhm.
Because ultimately, if that's what's going on with someone, then you can deny it, but
Mhm.
that doesn't do anyone any good.
Yeah.
So just letting people be in their experience and also letting them say this, like that's often something that like it's easy for groups like this to become like positivity echo chambers where
Right.
these sorts of people are like, oh, I don't belong because I'm having this different experience that doesn't
Mhm.
fit in this space.
Right.
And making it clear that that sort of thing is also welcome. Um, yeah, I think would be very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That makes a lot of
yeah,
sense. Yeah.
and I mean, this sort of ties back to this thing of like self agency, of like leading yourself that I mentioned earlier. Like ideally, people who feel this way would still feel that inner strength of taking charge and saying, like, bring themselves into the group, like, I'm feeling different and I get to be here in that difference.
Mhm.
But that's just very hard for people. So, like, if I
Yeah.
were leading something like a retreat, I would probably try and explicitly make some space for those sorts of voices rather than hope that
Mhm.
they will bring themselves up.
Yeah. That's a good idea. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think that once people are sort of opened up in these ways, which like opening people up sounds like a sort of thing that could be done in a bad way, right? But in this
Right.
case, I was
Mhm.
clear that like no, it's really like allowing people to feel open
Yeah.
and helping them work through the stuff that blocks them from being opened.
Mhm.
Like there's
And
a
I
lot
think
of yeah,
there's like a big difference between giving people the space to be open if they feel comfortable and like kind of pressuring them to open up before they feel ready.
absolutely. Yeah. 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 Which can be tough because sometimes there are people who will not respond well to, of course, any kind of pressure, but then also will never bring themselves into the thing, and also won't follow the won't enter into the spaciousness, even if you try to create that. So like, hey, are there any negative voices or anything? You know. I mean, I used to be one of those people as well. I still sometimes am, and in those cases, I would say it's just up to me to at some point find that courage.
Yeah. Well, and I
Sometimes you
think
don't, and sometimes you do.
yeah, it also comes back to the slowness. Like I know, like I'm someone that takes like a really, really, really long time to open up sometimes, but if I'm, you know, it's a slow thing, and sometimes that slowness is like on a scale of years. Like it's, you know, I just need to like to each time I get a little closer, and you know the opportunity ends, and when it comes back I get a little bit closer again, and as long as I'm not pressured, I'm still making progress internally. So I think just patience and giving people time is good.
For sure, yeah. Which also is facilitated in these spaces, right? Like you see some people who rarely add their voice into the group, and even though they paid 2.5K for this, and at some point you sort of have to trust that, like, well, maybe even if I don't see it, they're making progress somewhere inside themselves, or they're on their own journey, or you know, maybe they are having a really bad time, but then maybe they'll learn from that, and the next time they do it feel like this, they'll think to themselves, oh, I really should bring my voice out because last time I didn't and it was so fucking awful, you know? Yeah, at some point you just have to let people be.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so in general, I want to say it's like a space of that really fosters or can foster, but it definitely did for a lot of people, like a sense of like belonging within that group space, like being appreciated, being seen, being witnessed. There was a great sense of, I want to say, like interpersonal equality of which is quite rare. Like I feel like status games are ubiquitous, right? Like in any group, even if there's a group where like people are like really interacting, there's always still the sense of, okay, you're like more intelligent or hotter or like more confident or whatever it is. Or indeed, oh, you're less confident, you're less hot, you know, like this sort of thing. Where in this space, because we really saw each other in very real ways, we saw each other show up in real ways. Like it really felt like there was this just a sense of like, oh, we're all human, and that's kind of the main metric, and we're all equally there because we're all having this core humanity that we feel that we see in each other, and that's something that's so strong that it just overpowers kind of any other traits that you could judge a person on. And there's also, I want to say, like a sense of safety in yourself that like, oh, I am sufficiently accepted in this group that like my social status, let's say, is safe. I don't need to judge people anymore, you know, like this sort of thing. Like it's all right to let's say to be nice to everyone because I'm already accepted, like this sort of thing. Yeah, which is just really lovely to go through. Yeah, and so many people whose stories, like internal narratives about who they are, about how other people will meet them, how they will view them, about what other people are like, what other people can offer them. You know, so many stories about this get dissolved, and we all so often are in our heads with these stories the whole time, and it really takes this focus on like aliveness, like what's actually here in you, in the space around you, allowing people to feel and express those things. It takes a lot of that before you can stop being in those stories and start being where you are and kind of meet the reality where it's at. And it's from there that like so often people's stories are way more negative than they need to be. You know, like they were over calibrated against like danger or against like when they were still like a kid, like really small and incapable. But nowadays they really don't need to be true anymore. Yeah, and there's just like really beautiful spaces for moving
Mm.
past those stories. Like I had
Yeah.
stories, like I
Yeah.
went in with stories of like, oh, I can't dance, or like I
Mhm.
wouldn't be able to dance with people, or I can like flirt with women when it's physical, like I can like non-verbally, I mean,
Yeah.
or I can be sexy, or those sorts of things, right? And I really found that I could be all of those things in this space,
Mhm.
which has been incredible. Like I feel like I discovered the modality for myself to be in the world and to be with people that I've never inhabited before, and it feels so powerful and it feels
Mhm.
so good. It really feels like the best version of myself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, the letting go of stories is so powerful and so difficult. Like I've been trying to do that with myself the last couple of years, and like they're so ingrained, and it's like you hear fairy tales as a child, and like they really seep into your consciousness and like affect you, and you hear or create stories about yourself, and they really seep in, like, when you get that as a young child, and
yeah,
it's so hard to change them or let go of them. And it's a very, and when you let go of them, it's like, what do you replace that with? Do you not have a story? Do you make a new story? Like, it's a really tricky, difficult thing to navigate. So I love having these like spaces that kind of open up the opportunity to change those stories or let them go. It sounds
yeah,
like really, really very magical.
yeah. It really was, for sure. Yeah, it's just, I mean, it's some of the most beautiful stuff I've seen, in myself and people in life. Um, yeah, it's really beautiful, powerful, transformative spaces.
Mm,
Absolutely. I've been wondering kind of how to reflect back on all of this,
mm,
or to kind of summarize this for myself. Like I'll talk on a little bit about kind of the impact it's had on me and all of it it's sort of done for me in the weeks, in the months since. But um, because just so many different things happened, and it doesn't feel like there's maybe like a one pervasive theme in there.
mm.
Um, but if there was, I want to say there's something like maybe like identity anarchy or something, where there's something,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, something about. I mean, if we're talking like transhumanist technology or whatever, like changing who you are is like the primary example of this.
Mhm,
Um, and that can mean changes in yourself or like changes in how you influence social reality around you, like the social reality you set for kind of people to follow, so to speak. And I feel like what spaces like these, I don't want to say they show it yet. Like I wouldn't say that people become completely different people, like certain things do remain the same. But I do think that in a lot of, especially like in a lot of important ways, in a lot of ways that people get stuck in, like they get stuck in their own stories, their own ways of relating to themselves, their own ways of relating to other people, and their own stories of like um, the ways that they're allowed to be in the world. Like I mentioned, this sort of thing of like where people can feel, oh, I'm not allowed to be angry or not allowed to be sexual or any of those things. And I feel like these spaces are really fantastic experiment grounds for opening up the possibility, like unblocking yourself out of the things that kept you from claiming those sort of identities,
mhm,
and then experimenting and feeding into authentically inhabiting those identities that you maybe thought you'd never had.
mhm,
And in this sense, like once you get to this space of like extreme possibility and openness and spaciousness around identity,
mhm,
of like you can be anything, like you can be whoever you want.
mhm.
Um, there's just like a lot more possible than I have heard nearly anyone say is possible, you know.
Yeah.
Like I feel like we all have some sort of implicit sense of people can change this much, or maybe this much.
Mhm.
But it's probably not this much, and certainly not that much.
Right.
No, I've seen people, really
Mhm.
go from here to there, and I've
Yeah.
experienced it myself in a lot of ways, and I think it's incredibly powerful, and I think it's there's just a lot more possible than I would imagine or would have hoped is possible
Mhm.
for me, for other people.
Mhm.
And that's why I think this work is just incredibly beautiful, powerful, important, valuable,
Mhm.
because it really allows people to um, change who they are,
Mhm.
to become someone who they most love to be.
Mhm.
And I can't think of anything, more amazing than that.
Yeah, I love that term you use too, identity anarchy. Yeah, because that really jumps out at me. It really resonates with me because sometimes I change in ways that I don't expect, and I have this urge to show up for people in the way that they expect me to. And
Yeah,
sometimes I find myself as I change and heal and grow acting in new ways, and it catches people off guard because they weren't expecting that from me. And then I
yeah.
feel like I'm letting them down somehow. But yeah, I feel like thinking of it as identity anarchy is, is like a really helpful framing for me. I like that a lot.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's still like a topic that I'm experimenting with, finding
Hmm.
out more about. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think it's there's a lot more. It's like very strong. Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't really have more to say about it. I just spoke for 3 or 4 hours about it. This is
Yeah,
what I have to say.
yeah, yeah. That's amazing.
But yeah, I feel you. Yeah, there's also the sense of like how do you bring these changes back in your normal life,
Hmm.
where um which I'm still really grappling with. Like I don't have the answers for that yet. Like there's definitely been friendships that I've had where I kind of slowly phase out of them because as I change more and more, I found I wasn't really able to retroactively import those changes back into these friendships, and I'm still not sure what a good mechanism for that would be.
Hmm.
Um, which the more I change becomes a more pressing question. But yeah, I'll leave that up to future me to discover.
Mm.
As for present me, it has now been about a month since the retreat,
Mhm.
and I have noticed a bunch of changes. Some of those have been because I've been doing a keto diet for the last 3 weeks, but
Mm. Mhm.
also in the week between those two things, I already noticed a lot. One of them was that um, I used to be very conflict avoidant. I used to really try and sort of like hide away um, from if I felt there could be like a conflict happen between me and some other person, or if I did something like shameful or poorly or like badly, then I wouldn't bring it up. I would just sort of like in a lot of ways like hide and hope that the other person doesn't make a whole deal out of it,
Mhm.
or that I get to go by, even if it hits the relationship or like whatever context it is. I'm sort of like, well, it was just sort of felt impossible often to confront that.
Mm.
And I noticed that since the retreat, I just feel a lot more physical stability, like in my body. So that's partly what helps me to dance. Like dancing feels much better to me because I have that physical, just around like my heart space.
Mm.
Um, Something that used to be like very feels just unstable there is now stable,
Mm.
and that means that one of the consequences of it is just that I've also been much better able to confront conflict and to enter into it myself in terms of like if there's something like latent there that neither party is bringing up, then I've been able to bring it up. Like there was a
Mm.
situation that filled me with dread a week before, or like also during the retreat, because it happened while I was at the retreat, it happened at home, so to speak. And then when I got here, I was just able to right away like enter into it without any fear,
Mm.
because I felt that sort of stability in myself, and I felt like, well, this doesn't threaten me on that core level at all, so I can deal with it.
Mm.
Um, and that's just been a relief, like to finally have that kind of core stability. It feels like a very different life from how I used to feel, where a lot of things have just sort of started making sense now that didn't make sense at all beforehand, like on
Mm.
a self level. Um, yeah, I feel a lot less. I noticed that I used to feel sort of like a shame around myself when I was around other people, like a sense of, oh,
Mm.
they probably view me in this way or that way.
Right.
A lot of that has gone too, not completely, but
Mm.
definitely quite a bit. Um, just a lot more ease around this, a lot less worried about other people viewing me badly, because I've been authentic and I've seen that how other people react to it, and they react
Mhm.
wonderfully to it, not just one-on-one, in a group context. And that's been really healing for me. Um, yeah, I feel very inspired by the work that the facilitator did, the way that he used his attunement as a great strength. I really hope that I will find my way to that, to be able to leverage it as something beautiful and something that can provide so much value to other people, because I really um, feel that it is one of my very core traits in a lot of ways. And in some way, I want to say like I've always felt it was important and valuable, and I kind of try to protect it as a part of me. But now was sort of one of the first times that I really felt that shine, both in seeing it in someone else and
Mhm.
seeing it in myself, and being able to help people and give them joy through this,
Mhm.
and kind of show them an example and lead them with that example. Um, it's just been really wonderful. Like it's the sort of thing where like, oh, like this really core thing that I've always felt disadvantaged by, and now it seems to be like it could be the source of so much beauty in the world. And I'm really
Yeah.
excited to bring that
Mhm.
to the world in some way. I don't know yet how, but I know I want to, because the things that I can create are so beautiful, um, and can be just really valuable for people in a way that I think few things are.
Yeah, that's lovely.
Yeah,
Do
yeah,
you um do you feel like coming out of this like very intense experience, has there, you've had a month of space from it,
yeah.
was there any kind of like emotional crash or like thing like that that a lot of people get after intense experiences, or has it just been a fairly smooth, like obviously processing and you're not quite the same, but sort of settling into something more like normal life?
Hmm. I don't know if there has been or hasn't been for other people.
Hmm.
For me, there hasn't been a crash like that. Um, there just hasn't been.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. But I mean, also because I had the good fortune that I'm on a sabbatical right now, so I was just able
Mhm.
to stay with this
Mhm.
experience, journal about it a lot,
Yeah.
talk to a friend about it.
Mm.
And I mean, now, of course, this talking to you about it.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, I have not been forced into a context that is like the antithesis of
Mm.
this.
Mhm.
Like if I know some people who go home on Sunday and then on Monday go back to work.
Mhm.
I am really glad, Mary, that I'm not one of those people, because that would have been
Mm.
really a very big vibe shift.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do wonder and worry a little, like, how am I gonna bring this stuff to any kind of professional
Mhm.
capacity that
Mhm.
I would be operating in the future?
Yeah.
I really don't know. That's kind of a big question for me right now, is like, is there a way to use these strengths and skills and abilities
Mhm.
somehow on the work floor? And I don't mean like, hey, like inviting your coworker, let you and I scream in an office room for a little while, not like that, but just some sense of like having to being
Mhm.
able to let that out,
Mhm. Yeah.
and like to minimize sensitivity, like those sorts of things, rather than having to press them some.
Mhm.
I'm really not sure. I will be discovering that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it for me. From my side. I'm curious if you have any questions. You mentioned one at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. There's one that I mentioned before we started recording.
Right.
What kind of advice do you have for either for people organizing an event or some kind of group uh, thing that is intended to be healing, like a support group or a workshop or something, but also for people attending these things, because it can definitely, it can go in a healing direction, or it can go in a very like opposite direction, like a very kind of pile on more trauma. um
Hmm.
and I'm wondering if you have any sense of like what elements can people include, or what elements can people look for that
Hmm.
might make a difference. There's probably not going to be like a definitely this will make it all good and this will make it all bad, but do you have a sense of what are some key elements?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's very difficult, mostly because all of these workshops and retreats, when they self-describe themselves on their websites, a lot of them sound kind of the same.
Mm,
You know, um, it's hard to get a sense of the vibe beforehand. And like in general, I would say that sobriety is a must. Like
mm,
if it's an event intended for like healing, then there shouldn't be any drugs involved, I think, most of the time.
mm,
I don't want to say that it's never that drugs cannot be healing. Certainly, I know for some people they can be, but unless it is a drug healing event, like
mm.
if you're gonna go to a healing event, try and make it sober.
Yeah.
Um, um, I I want to say in general that like retreats being female led is a plus point, but in this case, the lead facilitator was male, and it was the best retreat I've gone to. So you kind of pay attention to the vibes of whoever the lead facilitator seems to be. If you happen to be able to catch a workshop from a facilitator before you sign up for a big event, that would be really great. You can get in a sense of what their vibe is like, how they facilitate, if their facilitation style works well with you, if you feel good around them. Because in this case, I signed up knowing basically nothing about this event beforehand, and in a lot of cases, you'll know almost nothing about what's going to happen.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and you're just gonna have to sign up like based on, yeah, do I figure the vibes are gonna be good or
mhm,
not?
mhm,
So the more you can find out about these vibes beforehand, the better. And especially for longer retreats, I think a lot of facilitators will be pretty happy to jump on a brief call with you,
mhm.
to see if it would be the right call for you to go there. Um, is there anything else? I want to say something like, if people mention having support people in the room, like support angels who you can always go to talk
Mm,
to.
mhm,
Um, those people, having them be available may or not may not be necessary for you. But it does show that the organizers are kind of aware that like these can be difficult spaces, and it can be good to support people in this, rather than just leaving it all on your own.
I like that term too, support angel. Like what?
Yeah.
What's the structure like around that? It's just like, hey, I'm here to help if anyone needs to talk, or okay.
Yeah, pretty much. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, most of the time they're made known beforehand, and you just know that like if you're ever in a tough situation, you can just walk up to them and have a chat. You can even interrupt their own exercises and ask them for a chat. Yeah. And I mean, so often these support angels are part of the exercises themselves. I've known of a few cases where a support angel was like announcing to the group, like, okay, I stopped being a support angel because right now I am on my own process and I need that.
Yes. Right.
But then often there will still be others available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very cool. I love that idea. That seems like a useful thing to have.
Yeah, and I think in general, just like a lot of this stuff is word of mouth. So if you don't know anyone who's into these sort of spaces and you don't know any of these spaces, it's going to be tough to get in and find the right ones. But once you start getting to know people, and especially on Twitter, like in our circles, there's a bunch of people who've done a bunch of retreats.
Sure.
And if there's someone where you're like, I like your vibe, I respect your vibe, what are retreats that you can recommend, then they'll be able to give you some advice about that. Like for instance, with ISTA. ISTA is famously, this is the International School of Temple Arts, by the way. They have a spiritual, sexual, shamanic initiation experience. And it's a little infamous because you're not allowed to talk about the contents of that initiation at all.
Oh, interesting.
For good reasons. But it's still very popular, and there's just like dozens of level ones being organized throughout the entire world, mostly Europe, I think, every year. And it's so popular because people see other people who are clearly above average in their aliveness, in their joy, in their being able to be themselves. And then you sort of hear often like, oh, a lot of these sort of people seem to have done ISTA. Well, then maybe that seems like a good direction to go into. And based on that, people attended.
And you had good experiences with ISTA?
With ISTA. Yes. I want to say it was very, very challenging. The most challenging retreat I've done.
Oh.
Yeah, by some distance. I mean, I can't talk about it. Otherwise, I would love to do another podcast with you about it. It was very challenging. It is a very challenging space. It is quite intense and extreme. And like it's good that I didn't know beforehand what was going to happen, because if I'd known beforehand, if I'd known what it would have been like, I would have gone. But you can know what it would be like just by reading about what the events are, what the exercises are. And if I just read the exercises, I would have never gone like in my life. But I'm very glad that I did go. Because especially once you get to these sort of like shamanic or mystical spaces, or like the better like emotional healing spaces, it's not so much the content as the context, like the way that things are done rather than what is being done.
Right.
And you if you just hear about what happens, you're not getting a tenth of the experience. And that's sort of the thing that ISTA is, like the context of it is very powerful. And that makes the entire experience quite powerful. Yeah. I'd say it's intense. If someone I would definitely not recommend it as someone's first event. This healing and tribe thing, maybe I would. I think I might. With ISTA, I would say try and do some work beforehand, and then at some point you might feel ready for it.
Yeah.
And then I would say follow that sense.
Mhm. Yeah, this has been so eye-opening for me, like hearing about this stuff, and it really because I actually the reason that I decided I wanted to do this podcast is like I've been getting this, I don't know if you get those like kind of rising building like feeling that you need to do something, you need to develop some area of your life, and like I've been getting that building feeling for some time that I need to kind of like develop my feeling of like community and sense of belonging and things like that, and like feeling a sense of home and connection with groups, because I connect well with people one-on-one, but
Yes.
in groups and communities it's much harder for me, and I felt like I needed to sort of participate more and like be more active in communities, and so like this podcast is like a way for me to get into that, like to connect with people one-on-one, which I'm comfortable with, but in a slightly more public area. So like
Mm.
in a more public way. So it's like it's a way for me to ease in slowly to that.
Mm.
So kind of small steps in that direction. But yeah,
Yeah, I
so
love
like
it.
having this as the first one is like just like an amazing serendipitous thing that I love. And
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like all these things that you've talked about, like I need to integrate them and process them and stuff. I didn't even go to the I was just like hearing about it. Yeah, like kind of weave that into my reality of what is
Yeah.
possible. So I also really love that, I can help facilitate putting that out into the world, and other people can hear about this
Yes.
too, and weave it into their own reality in whatever way works for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm really grateful that you wanted to do the podcast with me because I just feel like it's been a really wonderful time, and you've really helped me to kind of like really share about it in a way that felt very alive for me and that I could
Oh, yeah.
really feel into. Like I also really wanted to bring this to the world, but I knew I needed someone, and
Mm.
you are absolutely the right person for this. So I'm really grateful for that. And I
Aw,
just really enjoyed the process. It's been lovely
yeah,
talking with you.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it too. However
Cool.
many hours it was, like every minute was
It's a
just
lot.
like, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, to any listeners, if you made it this far, that's amazing. Props to you. Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious also, like, if you do this integration of it, like, if you want to talk about it sometime, then let me
Yeah,
know. I'll be available.
absolutely. Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely like, yeah, yeah, things come up, and yeah, I'll probably wanna reach out and check in with you about that.
Cool. I'll keep an eye out.
Cool.
Mm.
Um, okay. Uh, well, thank you so much for being on. And yeah, any closing thoughts or anything?
Um, yeah, I think anyone listening to this should feel free to reach out to me, if they want to talk about it. Um, I um, so I didn't mention the name of the retreat,
Mm,
and I did it also for confidentiality reasons. So I won't be naming it here.
mm,
But if we're like mutuals and you feel like I'd probably share it with you, then you're probably right. Reach out to me and I can give you the name of the retreat. Um, um, yeah, and just in general, I'd love to hear the thoughts of anyone who listened to this, hear what resonated,
mm.
what stands out for them. It's also just an ongoing process for me to integrate this and see like what role do I wanna do I want this to play in my life? How do I not take this home, integrate it into the rest of my life? So if anyone's got any ideas or opinions about that or insights that they'd like to share, absolutely, I'm here for it. Yeah, and Leslie, if you're in the Netherlands, I am too, so hit me up. Yeah, it'd be great to hear that from anyone. I think that's it for me. Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.